All right, here we go. Episode one of what are we calling this? I know,
I
like
think tentatively Face in the Pew or Theology
facing the
Thursday or
pew or
something like
theology.
that.
I could also just like do facing the church. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, whoever.
But the
We'll
church
figure it
is
out.
not a building, so that could be misleading.
That's true. That's true. Facing the pew, I guess. So we're going with. We'll go with that for now. We'll change it if
Mhm.
need be. Um. Anyways, yeah. So we want to just have a dedicated show just for discussing faith-based theology matters, um, that is meant to be separate from our Face in the Crowd show, our weekly show, which focuses on more broadly culture war topics. So
Right.
here we are. Um,
This
we
will
just have
be
a
a
couple of
little more focused in on like specifically Christian issues, and maybe
yeah,
occasionally we'll cover like theology proper debates that are like,
yeah.
bigger issues in the church. We'll
Hmm.
see.
All right, so yeah, we just basically just got a couple of tweets that we want to discuss for this episode. So we'll just start off. This is from the Pope. Obviously, we're not Catholic, but of
Mhm.
course, the Pope is a Christian leader, so
Yes.
it's important to at least discuss what he has to say. So this tweet went semi-viral in the Christian sphere, because of course it did. So basically, you can kind of read it there. The Pope is basically saying Scripture is important for our faith. He says it's the only true compass for our journey, and it alone is capable of leading us back to the true meaning of life amid so much woundedness and confusion.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of controversy with this. First of all, you had your Protestants who are just like, "Chat, look, Pope Francis is pro sola scriptura," and the Catholics are just like, "That's not what he's saying."
Mhm.
Um, I'm not super well versed in this. You're probably more well versed in this debate than I am. So, what's your thoughts on this?
So I think just reading the tweet, like very objectively reading what it says, Pope Francis has not said anything controversial, even in a
Yeah.
Catholic perspective. Like I think as Protestants, we often tend to kind of blow out of proportion the whole, oh, the Catholic Church relies on tradition thing. Yes, they do rely on tradition. They also rely on the Bible. And I think there's problems with the extent to which they rely on tradition, but like the Pope saying the Bible is good is not the Pope saying tradition is bad. And so I
Mhm.
think that this probably shouldn't have been
It
controversial,
shouldn't.
even though,
That's kind of my take as well. I feel like there's nothing remotely controversial about this,
yeah.
but it's also a tweet on this app called Twitter, that
Mhm.
is particularly known for people wanting being at each other's necks about everything.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, like I fully agree with Pope Francis with this tweet. I don't think there's
Mhm.
anything wrong with it. The sola
Honestly, yeah.
scriptura debate it's kind of exhausting just because I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like neither side really understands the other side's perspective in a certain
Mhm.
sense. um, at least like I feel like I see a lot of Catholics who kind of straw man the sola scriptura position.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, I've also seen Protestants straw man a lot of Catholic views on things such as like praying to saints and stuff like that. So it certainly goes both ways
Right.
with that, because of course everyone gets their theology from TikTok nowadays. So
Right. I guess I'm honestly kind of sad that this led to like controversy because
yeah,
any Christian should be able to read this and be like, yes, Bible word of God, that's good, good,
yeah.
good tweet. And
And I guess I should
somehow we
say,
turned it into an argument.
I mean, most of the controversies in the comments here, it feels like most people I've seen responding to this generally didn't have anything bad to say about it, regardless of their
Okay, fair
denomination.
enough.
Of course, it's just in the comments that I've seen, and of course, some responses to the comments, which I guess that's kind of just what to expect from Twitter. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
The comments are always going to be a war zone.
the comments are always worse than the actual post.
Mhm.
But yeah. Anyways, so we have one other that is probably going to be a much bigger topic to discuss. If you want to go next
Yeah.
slide. So first of all, I
We
just
can
like
move to the next slide here. Yes.
okay. So this post is from, I guess, the State of Theology. Again, I don't know. I haven't looked at the source or determined if it's a reliable source, but
Yeah.
essentially, this seems to suggest that 43% of evangelicals don't believe Jesus is God. Which, I mean, that I believe that Jesus is God, and that is an essential piece of Christian theology, Christian faith, and is essential to the entirety of the gospel story.
Yeah.
So obviously something's going on here. First of all, what are we defining as evangelical here? That's a little bit tricky. Are you just encompassing a wider perspective of evangelicals, or are you specifically talking about non-denominationals? Are you talking about conservative Christianity, which is probably not what they're talking about here? But like evangelical
Yeah,
could mean
definitely not.
a few different things. Like evangelical could just be someone who evangelizes too, which so it's a very broad, very broad thing. I'm assuming this is referring to the sect of Christianity that is tends to be low church, like the lowest church, so non-denom.
Mhm.
Baptist is would probably be included in there. A lot of just your more modernized churches as well, the ones with all the lights and the
Yeah.
entire like band up there for worship, um, like aesthetically. So
Honestly,
okay.
it baffles me how they got this number.
Mhm.
It's like,
And of course, like, is this in the US? Is this in the world? There's a lot of missing
yeah.
information that I'd like, for this, but I still think there's enough that here to talk about.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. But I mean, they have to be defining evangelical really, really weirdly, I think.
mhm,
Probably including like mainline Protestant denominations would be my guess.
possibly. So obviously, this is like a very theologically liberal position, so
Yeah,
much so that it wouldn't even qualify as a Christian position.
right.
Like if you believe this, I would not consider you a brother or sister in Christ. So who knows? Maybe they're looping in the spiritual but not religious individuals as well into
That could
this.
be.
They certainly could be. It's also like this graph is from 2022, the most recent one, which I mean, hopefully it hasn't gotten worse. We obviously only
Yeah,
have
I
2 years to design a trend based off of, but it's not looking great if we
mhm.
are to follow that. um, I will say that one of my hot takes is I think that there's a significantly large portion of I guess lukewarm Christians in at least in the US and probably the West, more broadly speaking. Um, do I want to say the majority of Christians in the West are lukewarm? I hesitate to say that. I'm also not um, necessarily condemning people or trying to claim people's salvation status.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out that a lot of people seem to not have a strong foundation of their faith.
Mhm.
um,
I don't think that's really a hot take, though, that there are a
it,
lot, perhaps even a majority of Christians are
it
lukewarm.
because like even like if I look at like my high school friends, for example, like the vast majority of them that were somewhat religious or like their parents forced them to go to church or whatever, they are not currently practicing their faith, or at least
Mhm.
barely practicing their faith if they are at all, which is kind of sad to realize, though it is pretty well known. I feel like I heard a statistic one time that like 80% of people walk away from their faith when they go to college. At least
Yeah.
I don't know what group that's specifically studying, but so not surprising. And I'm assuming that a lot of them would eventually return to the faith given some point, which obviously that's not exactly the ideal life trajectory.
Right.
But it is true that as people get older, people tend to get more conservative, and I think a lot of people tend to give religion a second chance as they get older as well. Perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's generally true. And I think you could also make the argument that there's a real lack of theological depth or theological knowledge behind the average person sitting in a church pew. And I think that's
Right.
even true of like generally more conservative, like that's true, I think, of the conservative non-denominational or Baptist churches as well as the mainline Protestant churches. In my experience in those churches, the average person you meet doesn't have a ton of theological depth. I, I think most of them would still be able to tell, like if you went to a Baptist church, I think most of them would be able to tell that this statement on the screen is obviously wrong.
Hmm.
But like again, that's definitely a problem within
Yeah, I think that a
evangelicalism.
lot of the people that don't know this is pretty like theology 101 are probably
Yeah.
like not church like regular churchgoers. They might be Christmas Easter only churchgoers, and
Hmm.
which of course would then make sense that they don't have much teaching. Of course, like you don't have to have sound theology on every single topic to be saved. That's not a requirement for salvation. But I
Right.
do it does give at least somewhat of an idea of your experience within the faith as well as your particular knowledge in the faith, and there at least could be at least somewhat of a correlation that at least in theory, the deeper you are, the more connected you are with the with your faith, with the church, the stronger your theology is going to be. Which I think that shouldn't be difficult to understand at all.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, I think a lot of churches today just aren't teaching like really solid theology either. Like
Yeah,
if
they
you
do
go
your
to a lot of mega churches, generally you're hearing a pretty similar sermon every week on like the
oh, yeah.
very
Mhm.
basics of Christianity. And like the very
Yeah,
very basics are great, but at some point you've got to move beyond the very basics and
it's
actually
actually
start like
that's
growing.
basically the main reason that I left my old church and
Yeah.
pursued a different church, which was largely the same aesthetically, but does have, I think, a lot deeper theology and much better sermons. Because, I mean, like, I prefer depth over breadth sermons
Mhm.
nowadays. Of course, for a new believer, your breadth over depth sermons are going to be more important just to get kind of the basics down. So that's where it gets a little bit challenging. And like, sure, like the mega churches, they'll probably have like smaller groups that focus on that. So they have the Bible studies, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, that requires additional work beyond the church, and you have to actually
Right.
take the step to get connected. And I think it'd just be better if they actually preached deep theological sermons, just to the general crowd.
Yeah, I think so. Like I'm looking for a new church right now too, partially because I want deeper theology and partially because I
For
want
at
more
school,
tradition.
at home.
Yeah, like this morning I went to a Reformed Baptist church and I'll be going to a Presbyterian church next week. But because
Nice.
like I don't just want to sing the same five worship songs every week I go to church. Like I
And
want
then
to
they
sing
get ruined.
some
Yeah.
hymns with real depth. And like the sermons at my old church were generally pretty great, honestly.
Yeah.
But like I don't know, I want more of the tradition to it and more of the theological
Yeah,
depth.
I mean, I've also felt a general draw towards the more traditional denominations, which I think that might just be because there's a lot less defenders of, like, say, non-denominationalism on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, you could defend it as a legitimate form of Christianity, but not necessarily defend it as a needed form of Christianity. Um, which is particularly true. So, like, I feel like if you spend a lot of time online, you're probably going to be drawn to the high church denominations, whether that's
Yeah.
historic Protestant or gonna like Catholic Orthodox.
Hmm.
Although speaking of Orthodox, this specific tweet on screen was a response to another tweet that I think mentioned something like over half of Orthodox Christians. I want to say that's it. Let me pull it up quick. Or I'll just look it up here in X. Um, yeah, it says that there's apparently a survey that 54% of Orthodox Christians favor same sex marriage. Um, so, of course, is this an issue that's like exclusive to evangelicalism? It's hard to say. There's going to
Right.
be, uh, I mean, it's pretty clear that like every denomination has its conservative and liberal theological sects,
Mhm.
um, which of course makes it difficult, and that's why. Honestly, this is why I want a stronger church that's more willing to stand up for the Bible instead of just kind of caving away into this kind of corner, completely separate from the culture. And because I mean, like that's why I support Sumer's Reconquista movement, even if I'm not necessarily a historical Protestant. Just because I do want to see the church get a stronger hold on the communities around them, and of course the culture as a whole here in the West.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, I guess Zoomer's one of the reasons I'm being drawn more towards the more traditional denominations because like my logic for it is when if you look just at culture in general, a rejection of tradition is leading to problems that the traditions originally solved.
Yeah.
And so I kind of apply that to the church as well. That like, what if by getting rid of these traditions or ignoring them, we're going to end up facing problems that those traditions were put in place to avoid. Um, and I think obviously the theological liberalism and even in some cases like just the extreme rejection of basic theological ideas, like this statistic says,
Right.
is it could be considered evidence of that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Like,
That
uh, w
was an
tradition does
unthinking
have
thought.
value. Like, no matter what the Protestants say about the Catholics, tradition is legitimately important. It's not
Mhm.
authoritative, but it has value, and we shouldn't throw away tradition just because I get bored when
Right.
I listen to hymns.
Right, and obviously, I think it's unwise to tie tradition into, like, salvation because
Yeah, for sure.
that definitely doesn't apply, but, like, there's nothing wrong with having church traditions that your church or your denomination performs, as long as
Right.
they aren't somehow tying it to salvation. Like, for example, if you go to, like, a hyper charismatic church that somehow ties praying speaking in tongues to being saved, I would have a I would have a very, very strong dislike of that. Um,
Yeah, me
I
too.
wouldn't even consider that church to be Christian at that point.
Mhm.
Just as that's just an example.
That I don't know if that's a perfect example because
It's
honestly,
not, no.
charismatic churches are probably some of like the most anti-tradition and anti-organization of all the churches
True.
out there. But like,
Yeah.
I do understand what you mean. If you're,
Mhm.
and I think most churches would probably do that more implicitly, like
Right.
trying to tie tradition to salvation. I think you'd
Yeah,
probably generally see it in
it's
like some
definitely a lot
hyper
more like
conservative Baptist churches.
right, right. It's gonna be more in your fundamentalist sects than you'll see
Yeah,
anywhere else.
for
Like
sure.
like your average Catholic probably doesn't think like having all the sacraments is tied to salvation, or maybe they do. I don't really know. Um,
If they're theologically informed in their church's tradition, they probably do think having the sacraments is tied to salvation.
that's
But
that's a good point. The Cathlo Bros and Ortho Bros on Twitter,
yeah,
who knows what they actually end up knowing? They switch their denomination every 2 weeks, anyways.
right, exactly. They see a picture of a new cool looking church and they've changed their denomination.
Yeah,
Anyway, what were
yeah.
we talking about? We
I don't
feel like
know.
we get a little off track. Tradition or something.
Yeah, I was talking. I guess just like broadly talking about at least for me, my draw towards the more traditional
Right,
churches. Like
yes.
even now, like I like my current church, but I don't necessarily love it. Now, of course, like you shouldn't like you don't want to find the perfect church. Like you're not going to find the perfect church. So
Right.
like there is that, but like part of me is just like, man, it kind of be interesting to try to go to like a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church. I've been invited to a Catholic mass before. I didn't end up going because I was busy, but Like, it'd be
Sure.
kind of interesting to at least get exposure to those, and then maybe from that I could pick something. Of course, I don't want to join/change denominations sporadically. It would have to be a well-informed decision on my part, but we'll see.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like part of the reason I am looking at new churches right now is because I'm going through like kind of a denominational discernment thing because I want to be a pastor someday, and so I kind of need to figure out like what denomination I want to be a pastor in. So part of the reason
Right,
I'm
right.
looking for new churches is like, okay, I think that Presbyterianism sounds kind of cool, but I've never actually been to a Presbyterian church, so I should probably actually do that at some
And
point.
that propaganda from Zoomer is powerful.
I swear it's not Zoomer.
It's
I'm
not
probably
Dr.
I'm sure
Helsa.
it's more Dr. Helseth than
No,
Zoomer,
yeah,
honestly.
that's fair.
But
That's fair.
I'm sure Zoomers had something to do with it. Honestly, it's more Keith Foskey than Zoomer. Keith Foskey and his
Yeah.
denomination video.
Nice. Obviously, though, like you disagree with their position on like infant baptism, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. I'm kind of trying to convince myself that infant baptism works just because I want to be a Presbyterian, and I'm not completely convinced yet. But
I don't think that's a particularly wise strategy, but
yeah,
you
I know it
know,
isn't.
yeah,
I, but,
yeah. I don't know.
oh,
It's gonna be interesting. I'm also kind of just curious to see where Gen Z ends up in general. Obviously, there's a
right.
large trend towards the high church
Mhm.
denominations. Um, will that change? I don't really know. Will there be some massive non-denominational influencer that has a massive draw to all of the trad bros, whatever you want to call them?
I really doubt that, honestly.
I doubt that. I mean, like all of the non-denominational influencers are either they don't discuss their faith much at all in their channel,
Mhm.
or they're like a like they're not like a theology based channel. Um,
Right.
if they are a faith based channel at all, um, and like of course a lot of them are also, yeah, like it's just not like the same theological content that you'll see from like even someone like Zoomer. Um,
Right.
which, yeah, I mean that's kind of like what I was meant. Like there's really no theologically based non-denominational YouTube channels or influencers on the internet to really have much of a draw at all.
And honestly, that probably stems like
Which,
partially from the relative youth of the non-denominational movement. It's not that old, and so there's
mhm,
not like a lot of like material out there yet that's like this is what it means to be
right,
non-denominational and
right,
this is why it's good to be non-denominational. It's more
yeah,
just like people who are non-denominational.
mhm. Yeah, I think just there it's much harder to defend as well, at least in my opinion, although it could just be
Yeah,
more of a self-critical type of thing. I tend to be much more self-critical towards myself and my own beliefs than I am of others, in some cases, so
sure.
that could be it as well. Yeah, I don't know. Again, like, I'm I feel like I see so many issues within your stereotypical non-denominational churches, just like in general. It's not just like exclusive to one church that I'd really like to see some change to.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, for starters, like a lot of the non-denominational churches are actually affiliated with a non-denomin or with an actual denomination.
Exactly.
For example, a lot of them might be affiliated with a Pentecostal sect or a Baptist sect. Of course, non-denominational theology is basically Baptist-costal,
Hmm.
um, which, yeah,
Like
what a
the so-called non-denominational church that you and I went to for all of last semester was actually
Yeah,
an SBC church. And I was
that blew my mind.
I was legitimately really annoyed when I found that out, because their whole thing was yeah, we're non-denominational. We're just following Jesus, bro. And then I actually read the super
Like,
hidden part on their website, and it was yeah, we're actually SBC.
it's so strange. It's like non-denominationalism is purely an aesthetic. It actually doesn't have
Yeah,
anything to do with a collection of churches.
right.
Yeah, it's what I want to say the evangelical free church is probably the closest thing to a truly defined non-denominational group,
Probably.
at least from what I would consider.
Hmm. But
Um,
I
yeah,
honestly don't know how they're different from Baptists.
because they aren't theologically,
Yeah.
just aesthetically, if even. Yeah. As I think that's plenty for first episode. You think?
Yeah, we've rambled for quite a while about things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Anyways, so we plan on doing these every other week. Every other week.
that is currently the plan.
So yeah, we're gonna plan on that. So I guess we will see. If you watch this long, we'll see you probably in 2 weeks. And thank you for watching the whole thing.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think about something we said.
Just broadly, anything,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
or the algorithm. Anyways, yeah. See you later.